Well, hey, biology, hope you're doing well when you watch this video. So, we got to save a little time just due to like some missed appointments and all that. So, let's go ahead and take notes on this uh, PowerPoint together. And so, it's all about evolution today. Okay, this is part one, so we're gonna do other parts hopefully in class or whatnot. But it's all about this guy, Darwin. And we talked about when we watched the video. And so, before you do this, explaining how organisms inherit their traits from their parents would be wise. Like, how do we inherit traits? And hopefully, you thought about genes. How does everything go from So everything starts with DNA, right? So DNA. What's the next? RNA, protein, and of course, scientific process and methodology. And so we talked in class a little bit about a worldview, right? Trying to make sense of a worldview. Evolution is a worldview. And in class, we read through Genesis 1 about the creation story. Okay, remember, Darwin had a faulty reading of Genesis. I mean, he based his entire theory on that God created species, special creation, but it says kinds. Okay, and so, I want you to dive into this. I want you to just question it, right? Like, think about like, okay, well, just because evolution says this, is that true? Is that accurate? Okay, so. The Spanish flu, here's the Spanish flu, 1918. This flu virus was crazy because it actually attacked the people who are healthy the most. And so that's crazy to think about. Like, well, when you're healthy and strong in the prime of your life, you actually suffer more from it. And that flu virus is very different than the flu virus many of our school had this year. So what happened? Well, evolution happened. Things change, guys. Viruses change, bacteria changes, and animals and life, everything changes through time. Okay, so as I've been saying in class, evolution is a great theory when it comes to variation. Where should I write this at? Evolution is great when it comes to variation in a population. How can populations change? Fantastic. It's not very good when it comes to origin stories. Something coming from nothing. It's kind of poor explaining that. And we watched about like how humans have evolved, being able to drink milk. And we watched that in class. So here's some of the blanks today for your notes that are due this coming week. Evolution is the change in genetic population over time. That's a big key word right there, change of genes. Okay, evolutionary theory is the understanding and application to biological problems. So we need to understand evolution to be able to treat diseases and to develop crops well, and pesticides possibly. Industrial processes help us, and then of course understanding how life is all related. I mean, evolution can actually be used in forensics as well. And so it's just something to think about. Okay, evolution is not just a single hypothesis. It's based upon a lot of evidence and trials and a lot of different things. Okay, so here's Darwin's journey, right? 5 years around the planet. But he was saying, like, why are there no rabbits in Australia? He saw hares in South America. And so he's trying to come up with this theory, and he's trying to understand it, okay? And so, like, how living things change through time, living things are different around the world. And so Darwin was interested in geology and natural history. And so his observations, right, scientific method, everything starts with observations. His observations led to him seeing that there's diversity of life on Earth. And then organisms are adapted to the environment where they live. Okay, so we're not building perfect organisms. That's not what we're doing. We are building organisms that are specifically adapted to individual environments, okay? And so he saw, and this should be read, he saw species vary globally, locally, and over time. Species vary globally. All these different birds live in similar environments, therefore they have similar body structures, but they're not exactly the same, and they're definitely not the same species. Darwin noticed species vary locally. A famous example of this are his tortoises and finches. The tortoises on the different islands in the Galapagos. The different tortoises in the Galapagos had different shapes. And so tortoises don't swim, right? And so how in the world did they get hundreds of miles off the mainland? And so you can kind of see like there's a longer neck here, larger shell here. And so if I asked you, well, what about the vegetation on Hood Island? Where's the food at? Hopefully you would think, well, it must be high off the ground. Why? Because this guy has a longer neck. And so it had an advantage, right? Longer necks would have an advantage reaching the food. There must be plenty of food on Isabella Island. And so therefore protection was selected for, a shell to protect from various things. He also saw the famous Glyptodont, and he saw like that living things could be descended from extinct forms, known only through the fossil record, which is something you've already read about and written on. And so species do change. And Darwin termed this change through time as descent with modification, right? We're descending from ancestors, but we are gradually coming up with changes. The differential survival and reproduction of individuals, right, leads to possibly adaptations, right? If you survive and reproduce more than other individuals, you pass those traits on. And so Darwin had some influencers. If you look at the Grand Canyon, which is something I would love to go see one day, I've never seen it. It's people can see, remember Genesis, right? There's young people who believe in a young earth, and there's people who believe in an old earth based upon the reading. It allows for both. And then there's people who believe it's complete allegory, which means God's setting up like a cosmic temple, and we're just kind of getting a human perspective of how he did that. These two are the most popular views in Genesis. But yeah, if you see this, some people will see millions and millions of years, and some people would see thousands based upon a worldwide flood. But around the time of Darwin, these guys named Hutton and Lyell came up with a uniformitarianism, which is basically, if you wear a uniform, you're all the same, right? So basically the same rates, the processes, they've all happened the same through billions of years, right? So the Colorado River took millions and millions of years to form the Grand Canyon because it's been flowing at the same pace. And you're like, well, we can't go back in history. How do we know that? Well, it's just a faith-based thing based upon naturalism, right? There's always faith. You're either going to believe in man or you're going to believe in God's word. So Darwin asked himself, if Earth can change, what about life? And so fossils were a big thing that helped Darwin kind of solidify this theory. Remember Hutton, Earth is millions of years old, not thousands. And Lyell was like, man, same processes are happening now. The next guy that helped Darwin was a guy by the name of Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck. Jean-Baptiste, I love that name. And so he actually said, well, no, living things change through time, but they acquire their changes, they get them, and through that use or disuse, they pass it on to the next generation. So let's do a question. Let's say this guy had kids when he looked like this and kids when he looked like that. Are these kids more likely to be obese? Are these kids more likely to be strong? Well, probably not, right? Because the DNA, you can't really change the DNA based upon what you acquire in life, but you can change, and hopefully you thought about this, you can change your epigenetics. And so what's kind of crazy is that Lamarck was like, okay, well, they're just going to keep stretching and stretching and stretching through time, and through that use, they're going to pass those longer necks on. Darwin and Wallace was like, no, everything's just random chance. It's just random chance. Everything's just random, dumb, blind chance. And so the giraffes who have longer necks will survive and reproduce. But Lamarck was like, no, they acquire it, right? Acquire characteristics. And what's crazy is that there's a book now, and I don't think it's very good. Like, the reviews are pretty bad. I've never read it. But it's just interesting to think like, well, epigenetics is kind of what Lamarck was talking about. And the way you live your life does matter, because we can pass on changes in the epigenome, which turns genes, we talked about this, on or off. Malthus, of course, thought human beings, would be kept in check by war, famine, and disease. And of course, when you have the point right here, limited food supply, there will be war, famine, and disease. And so food supply, there's limiting factors. And so Darwin thought about all this. Darwin also artificially bred pigeons. Artificial selection is when nature provides variation, but humans are doing the selecting. And so if I showed you this picture, you're probably like, oh, these are 4 different birds, 1, 2, 3, 4. And they are, but all of these birds came from the rock pigeon through selective breeding. That's how much power and potential DNA has. DNA is crazy has a lot of potential. If you like corn, modern day corn came from teosinte through artificial selection. All of these vegetables, I love Brussels sprouts, they're so good. Kale's good. I've never had kohlrabi, but all these came from a wild mustard plant. They're all related through selective artificial selection through humanity. So basically Darwin's like, man, if humans can select for traits, could nature also? And so the answer is yes. In this environment, these guys have an advantage. They live because they're blending in. These guys have a disadvantage. So the predatory bird keeps eating the light-colored mice until eventually those mice become lower in number. And the next generation contains a higher fraction of black mice. We are like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But that, by definition, is evolution because we're changing the genetic frequencies. We're changing the alleles in the population. Darwin perceived also that adaptation to the environment and the origin of new species are closely related. Speciation, and we'll talk about that in class, but adaptations have to lead to, like, let's say a species diverges. Like eventually you have to have species A and B where they can no longer mate or create viable offspring. So you have to have speciation for evolution to be a true thing. And so on the Galapagos Islands, there's famous bird species, and we'll do a lab about this and like watch a little video. And there's like the cactus eater who like has a sharp beak to tear cactus flowers. And so it's all about environment. Yes, it's all about environment. Everything is specifically adapted to its environment. You have a large beak with the seed eater to crack seeds. You have almost like a needle-nosed plier to grasp insects, okay? And so Darwin wrote an essay on natural selection. Natural selection is a process which individuals with favorable traits, just due to random, dumb, blind chance, are more likely to survive and reproduce. And so here's some key features. And you have to write, we'll just do it right here. Members of a population have variations. More young are produced, so which means many young are dying. So they compete. The species who compete the best will survive and reproduce. Okay, and then that natural selection will result in selecting for those traits and possibly lead to an adaptation, which might lead to speciation over many, many, many years. And of course, we have tons of variations in the human population. And so Darwin's theory of evolution, it deals with two terms you need to know. Fitness, which is the ability of an individual to survive and reproduce. Okay, the most fit individuals in the population outcompete, right? And so they'll pass those genes on. So if you have high fitness means you pass genes on because you have an advantage. You do something, gather resources. It doesn't necessarily have to be fighting. You could blend in. You could make an enzyme that someone else doesn't, right? With the milk one, with humans, it's just an advantage that lets you survive and reproduce. Adaptation is a change that helps the species become more suited to its environment. Okay? So this was part one. Thank you for doing it at home. We'll talk about it, kind of review a few things. Remember your vocabulary quiz coming up, and we're almost done with the year, so let's finish strong. Much love in Christ, guys. See you.